It was a special evening, though not for any particular occasion. Sarah, ever the hostess, had prepared one of her signature meals: herb-crusted salmon, roasted asparagus, and her famous garlic mashed potatoes. The aroma filled the house, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched her move with grace and confidence in the kitchen. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a navy blue dress that brought out the striking green of her eyes. She was the picture of elegance and poise, the kind of woman who could turn heads in a room without even trying. Emily, our eldest at 20, was the spitting image of her mother. She had the same fiery hair, though hers was cut in a stylish bob that framed her freckled face. She was a sophomore at the University of Washington, majoring in environmental science, a passion she'd cultivated during our many camping trips in the Cascade Mountains. Tonight, she was telling us about a recent class project, her eyes lighting up as she described their efforts to restore a nearby wetland. Josh, our 16-year-old son, was quieter by nature, more inclined to listen than to speak. He had inherited my dark hair and brown eyes, but his lanky frame and quick wit were all his own. He was a junior at Roosevelt High School and spent most of his free time with a sketchpad in hand. His dream was to attend the Rhode Island School of Design, a goal he pursued with quiet determination. "Dad, do you think I could shadow someone at your company this summer?" Josh asked, breaking the momentary silence. I chuckled, touched by his earnestness. "You want to trade your sketchpad for spreadsheets?" "I don't know, buddy. That's a big leap." He grinned sheepishly. "I just want to see what it's like to work with you." As the evening unfolded, memories of how Sarah and I first met surfaced. It was the summer of 1999, and I was fresh out of college, eager to make my mark in the corporate world. I joined a local sports club to network, and that's where I saw her for the first time. She was on the tennis court, her movements fluid and confident, her laughter carrying across the clay. I'd never been one to believe in love at first sight, but Sarah changed that. Our courtship was swift and passionate. We bonded over late-night conversations about our dreams, walks along Alki Beach, and a shared love of music. By the time we married 2 years later, I was convinced I'd found my soulmate. Together, we built a life filled with love, laughter, and a fair share of challenges. As dessert was served, Sarah's homemade peach cobbler, still warm from the oven. The mood around the table was light and joyous. Emily teased Josh about his art projects, while Sarah recounted a humorous story about a neighbor's mishap with their sprinkler system. I sat back, taking it all in, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. And yet, there was a flicker of unease that I couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the way Sarah's laughter seemed a bit too forced, or how her gaze flitted to her phone whenever it buzzed on the counter. But I brushed it off, unwilling to tarnish the evening with baseless doubts. It was later that night, after the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, that the first crack in our perfect life appeared. I was in our bedroom, propped up against the headboard, scrolling through TikTok to unwind. Sarah had already gone to bed, her phone on silent and placed face down on her nightstand, a habit I hadn't given much thought until now. As I swiped through videos of cooking hacks and dog tricks, a notification caught my eye. A message on WhatsApp from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It was Sarah, wearing a dress I didn't recognize, her hair styled in a way she hadn't worn in years. The pose was sultry, the setting intimate. Beneath it was a chilling caption: "I'm checking your wife, because next time I'll braid her hair." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the words blurring before my eyes. The logical part of my brain insisted it was a cruel prank, maybe some sophisticated form of Photoshop. After all, anyone could take a random image and doctor it. But the sinking feeling in my gut suggested otherwise. I glanced over at Sarah, sleeping peacefully beside me, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She looked so serene, so innocent. It was hard to reconcile the woman in the photograph with the woman I'd loved and trusted for over 2 decades. I debated waking her up, demanding an explanation, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of shattering the fragile illusion of our perfect life. Or perhaps it was the faint hope that there was an innocent explanation, one that wouldn't destroy everything we'd built. Instead, I saved the photo to a hidden folder on my phone and resolved to investigate further. If this was some cruel joke, I needed to find the source. And if it wasn't, well, I wasn't ready to think about that yet. The next morning, the house was bustling with activity. Emily was heading back to campus, and Josh had an early soccer practice. Sarah moved through the kitchen with her usual efficiency, packing lunches and reminding everyone of their schedules. She kissed me on the cheek as I left for work, her touch as familiar as it was comforting. But beneath the surface, my mind was in turmoil. Every glance at her, every interaction, was tinged with suspicion. Was she hiding something, or was I seeing shadows where there were none? As I drove to the office, the message replayed in my mind, each word cutting deeper. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this go. Whatever the truth was, I had to uncover it. And so, with a heavy heart and a growing sense of dread, I began my search for answers. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my wife, my family, and myself. The streets of downtown Seattle buzzed with life as I navigated through traffic toward my office on Fifth Avenue. The Space Needle gleamed in the distance, framed by the gray clouds that often hung over the city. It was a typical weekday morning, but my mind was far from the spreadsheets and board meetings that awaited me. Ever since I'd received that message, my thoughts had been consumed by unease, a gnawing suspicion that I couldn't shake. At work, I did my best to focus, poring over quarterly reports and fielding calls from clients. Yet, Sarah's image, the one from the WhatsApp message, kept flashing through my mind. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my stomach tightened. I couldn't ignore the growing doubt, the fear that something was deeply wrong. At home, I started to notice subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. It wasn't anything overt, just little things that added up. She'd become more attached to her phone, carrying it with her even when moving from the kitchen to the living room. When it buzzed, she would glance at the screen quickly before locking it again, her expression carefully neutral. Then there were the sudden errands. Sarah had always been efficient, planning her grocery trips and other outings meticulously. But now, she would announce she was stepping out, without much explanation. Once, she even returned home with nothing in hand, claiming she'd forgotten her wallet. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. The sun was unusually bright, and we decided to spend the day lounging in the backyard. Sarah had set up a pitcher of lemonade on the patio table, her sunglasses perched on her head as she reclined on a lounger. Josh was sketching under the shade of a tree, and Emily had her nose buried in a textbook. It was a peaceful scene, one that should have put me at ease. But then, the sprinkler system malfunctioned, sending a jet of water spraying across the yard. Sarah jumped up with a startled laugh, dashing toward the patio to avoid getting drenched. In her haste, her phone slipped from her hand and landed in the grass near my feet. "Could you grab that for me?" she called over her shoulder, already halfway to the control panel. I bent down to pick up the phone, the screen lighting up as I did. And that's when I saw it, a notification from Tinder. The app's logo, a simple flame icon, stared back at me like a mocking reminder of my deepest fears. The notification preview was just a name and a message fragment. "Can't wait to see why." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Time seemed to stand still as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What was Sarah doing on Tinder? The app was for singles, for people looking to date, to hook up. It didn't make sense. "Thanks." Sarah's voice jolted me back to reality. She returned, smiling as she took the phone from my hand. If she noticed the look on my face, she didn't let on. "This sprinkler system is driving me crazy." I forced a smile, nodding mutely as she turned back to the patio. But inside, I was spiraling. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen. A quick search confirmed what I already suspected. Tinder was a dating app, popular for casual hookups. My stomach churned. Was Sarah using it? If so, why? I needed answers, but I couldn't confront her without knowing more. So, the next morning, I called Eric, my best friend since college. Eric was a self-proclaimed expert on the dating scene, a serial dater who could charm his way into anyone's good graces. If anyone could shed light on this, it was him. We met at our favorite cafe, a cozy spot in Capitol Hill that served the best coffee in the city. Eric arrived late, as usual, his leather jacket slung over one shoulder and his aviator sunglasses perched on his nose. "Nick, my man," he greeted me, clapping me on the back. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure how to begin. Finally, I blurted out, "What do you know about Tinder?" Eric's eyebrows shot up. "Tinder? Why? You thinking of joining the dark side?" "No," I said quickly. "It's Sarah." I saw a notification on her phone. His playful grin faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Whoa, that's heavy. Are you sure it was Tinder?" I nodded, explaining the notification I'd seen. Eric listened intently, his usual bravado replaced by uncharacteristic seriousness. "Look, man," he said when I finished, "Tinder's not exactly innocent. People use it to find dates, sure, but it's also known for hookups. If Sarah's on there, well, that's not good." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. But it doesn't mean she's cheating, right? Maybe she's just, I don't know, curious? Eric gave me a sympathetic look. "Nick, I'm not saying she's cheated, but being on Tinder when you're married? That's a red flag." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Eric's words replayed in my mind, each one adding weight to the growing suspicion in my heart. Could it be true? Could Sarah really be hiding something this significant? I thought back to the little moments that had seemed off, the way she guarded her phone, the mysterious errands, the forced laughter. Were they all signs I'd missed? Or was I reading too much into a single notification? I resolved to find out, but I couldn't rush into this. If Sarah was hiding something, I needed proof. Only then could I confront her with the full truth. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought lingered in my mind. The life we'd built together, the family we'd raised, everything we shared, it was all at stake, and I wasn't ready to lose it. Not without a fight. The glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the walls of my home office as I sat in the quiet stillness of the night. The house was dark except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Sarah and the kids had long gone to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing weight of my suspicions. I had spent the last few days trying to convince myself that what I had seen on Sarah's phone was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was some kind of spam, a prank, or even a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and the picture they formed was one I didn't want to see. That night, as I sat in my office staring at my computer screen, I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I was going to investigate. If Sarah was on Tinder, I needed to know for sure, and I needed proof. With a heavy heart, I created a new email address and registered for a Tinder account. I felt a strange mix of guilt and determination as I filled out the profile, choosing a generic name, Daniel Parker, and uploading a photo of a stock model I found online. I didn't want to deceive anyone, but this wasn't about finding connections. This was about uncovering the truth. As the account was verified, I hesitated. Was I really doing this? Was I crossing a line? But the image of that notification on Sarah's phone pushed me forward. I couldn't turn back now. Scrolling through profiles was a surreal experience. Faces flashed by, smiling strangers, polished bios filled with hopes and dreams. It felt wrong, voyeuristic, but I pushed those thoughts aside. My goal wasn't to judge. It was to find Sarah. And then, there she was. Her profile photo stopped me cold. It was a picture of Sarah I'd never seen before. Her hair styled in loose waves, a confident smile on her face, her green eyes sparkling. She looked beautiful, but the context turned that beauty into something haunting. Her bio read, widowed, 42, seeking companionship and adventure. Financially independent, love to travel, and looking for someone who knows how to enjoy life. Let's make memories together. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Widowed? Financially independent? The lies were blatant, each one a dagger to the life we had built together. My hands shook as I took a screenshot of the profile, ensuring I had evidence of what I was seeing. I hesitated before swiping right on her profile, knowing that doing so would put me in her match list. Almost immediately, a message popped up, "Hey there," smiley face. What brings you to Tinder? It was her, my wife, messaging me from her secret life. The surreal nature of the situation made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to respond. Hi, just looking to meet someone special. You? Her reply came quickly. Same. It's been a while since I felt a real connection with someone. Tell me about yourself. And so began the charade. Over the next few days, we exchanged messages. I kept my responses vague, careful not to reveal anything that might raise suspicion. Sarah, on the other hand, was candid, almost too candid. Through our conversations, I learned that she was pretending to be a widow, claiming that her husband had passed away in a tragic accident 3 years ago. She spoke about her freedom and wealth, painting a picture of a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. She said she had traveled extensively, loved Paris, and dreamed of retiring in the south of France. The lies stung. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a complete rejection of the life we had built together. The woman I thought I knew was presenting herself as someone entirely different, someone I didn't recognize. As our conversations grew more personal, Sarah began sharing details about her desires and fantasies. She even sent photos, candid, intimate shots that she had never shared with me. Each image was like a slap in the face, a reminder of the secret life she was living. I took screenshots of everything, the messages, the photos, the profile. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I needed to keep them. This wasn't just about confronting her. It was about protecting myself and our family. Late one night, after another round of messages with Sarah, I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal. They all swirled together, threatening to consume me. How had it come to this? I thought back to the early days of our relationship, the love and laughter we had shared. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we had made to each other. And now, here I was, uncovering a side of Sarah that I had never seen before. Part of me wanted to storm into the bedroom, confront her right then and there. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure, to have all the evidence I could gather. If I accused her without proof, she could deny everything, turn the situation around on me. No, I had to be patient, even if it tore me apart inside. As the days passed, the weight of what I knew grew heavier. I found myself watching Sarah more closely, analyzing her every move. Each smile, each laugh, each touch felt like a lie. I started to pull away, creating a distance that I hoped she wouldn't notice. But the hardest part was pretending that everything was normal. Around Emily and Josh, I put on a brave face, cracking jokes and asking about their days as if nothing was wrong. I didn't want them to see the cracks in our family, didn't want them to suspect the storm brewing beneath the surface. At work, I buried myself in projects, trying to distract myself from the turmoil at home. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't escape the truth. My marriage was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. One evening, as I sat alone in my office, staring at the screenshots on my computer screen, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this break me. I would uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it was. And when the time was right, I would confront Sarah, not with anger, but with cold, hard evidence. For now, though, I would wait. Wait and watch. Because if there was one thing I had learned from this experience, it was that trust could be shattered in an instant, but betrayal took time to unravel. And I was determined to see this through to the end. The Pacific Northwest rain drummed against the windshield as I drove through the gray streets of Portland, Oregon. It was one of those dreary days when the clouds seemed to hang low, wrapping the city in a damp, somber haze. I was on the trail of Sarah, who had told me she was heading to Portland for a day of shopping and errands. But I wasn't convinced. She had been more secretive than usual over the past few weeks, and her trips out of town had become more frequent. Today, I decided to follow her. If she was hiding something, this was my chance to find out. Disguised in a black hoodie, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, I had rented a nondescript sedan under a false name. I didn't want to risk being recognized if Sarah spotted me in the rearview mirror. My heart raced as I trailed her car, a white SUV, down the rain-slicked streets. She drove casually, her hands steady on the wheel, as if she had nothing to hide. But I knew better. We had left the busy streets of downtown Portland and were now heading into a quiet residential area. The houses here were large, modern, and spaced far apart, with neatly trimmed lawns and wide driveways. It was a neighborhood that spoke of wealth and discretion, the kind of place where secrets could be kept behind closed doors. Sarah's car slowed as she approached a house near the end of the cul-de-sac. It was a sleek, minimalist structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave it a futuristic look. The kind of house you'd see in a high-end architecture magazine. I parked a few houses down, my car hidden by a row of tall hedges, and watched as Sarah pulled into the driveway. A man emerged from the house to greet her. He was tall, muscular, and shirtless, his bare torso glistening slightly as if he'd just come from a workout. He walked with an easy confidence, his smile wide as he opened the car door for Sarah. She stepped out, laughing at something he said, and they embraced briefly before he led her inside. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it unfold right in front of me. But I needed more than just this. I needed proof. I waited for a few minutes, my mind racing as I planned my next move. I spotted a delivery truck pulling up to a nearby house, the driver stepping out with a package. Inspiration struck. I grabbed a small recording device from my bag, something Eric had suggested I purchase just in case, and approached the delivery man as casually as I could. "Hey," I called out, waving to him. "Quick question. I'm trying to pull a prank on my friend who lives down the street. Do you think you could help me out?" The driver, a young guy in his 20s, looked at me skeptically. "What kind of prank?" I held up the device. "It's harmless, I promise. I just need this placed somewhere near the front door. Like, tucked behind a plant or something. He's got a big mouth, and I want to catch him ranting about his fantasy football league. I'll pay you $20. He laughed, shaking his head. "Man, people do weird stuff these days." "Sure, why not?" I handed him the device and the cash, watching as he approached the house. When the shirtless man opened the door, the delivery man handed him the package and, with practiced ease, planted the recording device behind a decorative planter. He gave me a thumbs up as he walked back to his truck. Now, all I had to do was wait. I sat in the car, listening to the rain pattering against the roof as I monitored the live feed from the recording device on my phone. At first, the sounds were muffled. Footsteps, faint laughter, the clinking of glasses. Then their voices became clearer as they moved closer to the front of the house. "You're sure this won't get complicated?" the man asked, his voice smooth and confident. "Complicated?" Sarah's tone was light, almost amused. "I've told you, I don't have anyone to answer to. My husband passed away years ago. I've been on my own ever since." Her words cut deeper than I expected, the blatant line affront to everything we had built together. The man chuckled in response. I know, he said. "It's just, a woman like you. Someone's bound to be watching." "Trust me," Sarah replied, her voice taking on a flirtatious edge. "I've been careful. No one suspects a thing." Their words hit me like a punch to the gut, a confirmation of the web of lies Sarah had spun to hide her actions. But the worst was yet to come. "So, when's the third joining us?" the man asked. "Soon," Sarah said, her tone shifting to excitement. "He's been dying to meet me in person." There was a pause, followed by the unmistakable sound of a kiss. My stomach churned as I listened to the intimacy in their voices, the betrayal in every word. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, torn between rage and despair. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was here, in this house, planning some kind of sordid encounter with not one but two men. The betrayal was staggering, almost incomprehensible. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion took its place: resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. If Sarah thought she could keep this secret and continue living her double life, she was sorely mistaken. I would gather every piece of evidence I could, and when the time was right, I would confront her. But not in anger, and not in private. No, this deserved something far more dramatic. She had turned our marriage into a performance of lies, and I would return the favor. As I drove back to Seattle that night, the rain washing over the windshield like a cleansing wave, I began to formulate a plan. It would take time and precision, but I was willing to wait. Sarah had underestimated me, but that would be her undoing. I thought about everything I would need: legal advice, financial safeguards, and, most importantly, a way to ensure that the truth came out in a way that she couldn't deny. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the seeds of my plan were firmly planted. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the future I had worked so hard to build. And if Sarah thought she could betray me without consequences, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The plan required precision and control. This wasn't going to be a party or a grand masquerade with others around. Sarah had planned this as an intimate encounter, a meeting for just three. I would make sure it stayed that way. Sarah, still believing I was Daniel Parker, had been eager in her messages. Her excitement for the encounter was palpable, each word she sent filled with anticipation and flirtation. She wanted this to be special, a private affair, and I was more than willing to let her think it would be everything she dreamed of. I selected a secluded, high-end Airbnb on the outskirts of Woodinville, Washington. The house was elegant yet cozy, a perfect place for what she imagined. It was a single-story, open-plan home with a luxurious bedroom suite, soft ambient lighting, and a private hot tub on the deck, the kind of place where secrets could be safely shared. I arrived early to ensure everything was in place. The refrigerator was stocked with wine and champagne. The lights were dimmed just enough to create a seductive atmosphere, and the master bedroom was staged to look as inviting as possible. I set the stage exactly as Sarah would want it: intimate, indulgent, and private. The night before the meeting, I sat in my home office surrounded by the tools of my revenge: folders filled with printed screenshots, a USB drive containing damning recordings, and the shredded remnants of Sarah's wedding dress. Each piece symbolized another fracture in the life we had built together, and I was determined to ensure she felt every shard of the broken trust. I carefully packed the shredded wedding dress into a sleek black gift box, the kind you'd expect to find containing an elegant gown or luxury item. The fabric pieces, once pristine and white, now lay in tatters, a fitting representation of our marriage. I lined the interior of the box with satin fabric, a cruel juxtaposition to the chaos within. On top of the fabric, I placed an envelope containing the divorce papers, the words, "To my beloved wife," scrawled across the front in my own handwriting. Beneath the satin lining, I tucked the USB drive. It was small, almost innocuous, but its contents were anything but. The drive held everything: her Tinder messages, the photos she had shared with Daniel Parker, and the incriminating audio recordings from the Portland house. It was a time bomb waiting to detonate, one that would leave no room for excuses or denial. I spent an hour adjusting the box, making sure the presentation was flawless. The ribbon I tied around it was crimson, a bold splash of color against the black exterior, a symbol of the betrayal and pain that ran like blood through our now-ruptured marriage. Next came my disguise. I needed to ensure that Sarah wouldn't recognize me immediately upon arrival. The element of surprise was crucial. I chose a black hoodie and a simple pair of dark jeans, clothes that were inconspicuous yet gave me an air of quiet confidence. The hoodie's drawstrings were adjusted just enough to shadow my face, while the absence of cologne or accessories eliminated any lingering hint of familiarity. I even swapped out my usual leather shoes for a pair of plain sneakers, knowing that every detail, no matter how small, could betray my identity. The goal was to blend into the image of the man Sarah thought she was meeting, a mysterious, confident stranger with just enough allure to keep her intrigued. As the evening drew closer, I drove to the rented Airbnb in a car Sarah wouldn't recognize. It was a gray mid-size sedan I had rented under a false name, carefully chosen to be as forgettable as possible. I parked it in the driveway, deliberately positioning it at an angle that obscured the license plate from casual view. The Airbnb itself was perfect. Nestled at the edge of a wooded lot, the house was secluded and serene, with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the twilight outside. I spent the afternoon ensuring the scene inside was precisely what Sarah would expect. The lights were dimmed to a soft, warm glow, and the living room was arranged with an inviting sense of intimacy. A bottle of chilled champagne sat in a bucket by the couch, and a platter of hors d'oeuvres I'd purchased earlier was placed on the coffee table. The master bedroom was also prepared. though in a way that served my purpose rather than hers. The bed was made with crisp white linens, the duvet turned down just slightly, as though inviting the evening's guests into a carefully staged tableau. It was both elegant and sterile, an intentional reminder that everything about this setup was a performance. Once the scene was set, I placed the black gift box prominently on the coffee table in the living room. It was an ominous centerpiece, its presence commanding attention. I imagined Sarah's reaction as she untied the ribbon and opened the box, her anticipation turning to shock and horror as the contents revealed the truth. Finally, I tested the small recording device I had concealed in the room. I wanted every word of the confrontation to be documented, ensuring there would be no way for Sarah to twist or deny what happened here tonight. The device was well hidden, its placement designed to capture every detail without drawing suspicion. As the sun began to set and the first hints of evening crept across the horizon, I sat in one of the armchairs by the fireplace, letting the weight of what was about to happen sink in. The house was eerily quiet, the stillness amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. I thought about Sarah's messages to Daniel, the excitement in her words as she described how much she was looking forward to this night. I thought about the man she was bringing into this secret life, and how neither of them had any idea what awaited them. This wasn't just about exposing her betrayal. It was about forcing her to confront the full extent of her actions, to see the devastation she had caused in the starkest terms possible. I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was ensuring that the truth of her deception would be as undeniable as it was unforgettable. With everything in place, I took one last look around the house, ensuring that no detail had been overlooked. Then I pulled the hood of my sweatshirt up over my head, took a deep breath, and waited for the players in this final act to arrive. The first to arrive was Sarah. I heard the soft crunch of gravel under her tires as her car pulled into the driveway, the sound muted by the thick canopy of trees that surrounded the house. The last of the evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the secluded property. My heart pounded as I stood near the window, watching her through the barely parted curtains. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the driveway, the sound sharp and deliberate. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, the fabric shimmering faintly under the golden glow of the outdoor sconces. Her hair, usually tied back or left to hang naturally, had been curled into loose, deliberate waves that framed her face. She looked beautiful as always, but the effort she had put into her appearance tonight hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't dressing up for me. She was dressing up for them. Sarah adjusted her dress, smoothing it over her hips, then reached into the car to retrieve a small overnight bag. The casual confidence in her movements stung more than I anticipated. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside. No idea that I was watching her every move, dissecting every choice she had made to get to this moment. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped back from the window, retreating into the dimly lit living room. The soft glow of the table lamp cast a pool of light onto the black gift box resting on the coffee table. It was all set. All I had to do was wait. A few minutes later, the low, throaty growl of an engine broke the silence. The second car arrived, a sleek, midnight blue sports car that pulled into the driveway with a confidence that mirrored its driver. I recognized him immediately, the shirtless man from the Portland house. His smug demeanor and chiseled physique had been burned into my memory ever since I'd first seen him embrace Sarah. The car door swung open, and he stepped out like he owned the world. He was dressed casually in a fitted black button-up shirt, the top two buttons undone to reveal a glimpse of his tan chest. In one hand, he carried a bottle of champagne, and in the other, he held a small duffel bag. His smirk was infuriatingly self-assured, as if he had already won some unspoken game. He walked around the car to greet Sarah, who was standing near the house's entrance. She smiled at him, a smile that once belonged to me. My stomach churned as he leaned in to kiss her, a brief but intimate gesture that made my blood boil. They exchanged a few words, their laughter carrying through the night air as they approached the front door. They moved with an ease that suggested familiarity, their body language a stark reminder of the lies Sarah had been living. I waited for them in the shadows, standing just beyond the soft glow of the living room lamp. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic pounding of my heart. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, my pulse quickening as I heard the sound of the door opening. Their voices carried into the house as they stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind them. They were laughing softly, their words indistinct but filled with a casual intimacy that made my chest tighten. "Oh, this is perfect," Sarah said, her voice filled with approval. I watched as she slipped off her coat, revealing the full length of her dress. She set her bag down by the door, glancing around the room with a satisfied smile. The man followed her lead, tossing his duffel bag onto a nearby chair. He set the bottle of champagne on the kitchen counter, then turned back to Sarah, his hands resting casually on her waist. "You really know how to pick a place," he said, his voice low and smooth. Sarah laughed, the sound light and carefree, as though she hadn't a worry in the world. "I wanted it to be special," she replied. "Just for us." I stayed perfectly still, hidden in the shadows, as they moved further into the room. My breath was shallow, my pulse thundering in my ears. They were completely absorbed in each other, their attention focused entirely on what they thought was going to be the night of their lives. They hadn't noticed me yet, but they would soon. The moment had come. I stepped forward slowly, my hood pulled low over my face, shrouding my features in shadow. The dim lighting from the living room cast long, ominous shapes against the walls. The sound of their laughter died abruptly as they turned toward me, their smiles frozen mid-expression. Sarah's eyes widened, her brow furrowing in confusion. The man beside her stiffened, his posture instinctively shifting to one of defense, though his bravado faltered for a moment when he realized he didn't recognize me. "Daniel?" Sarah's voice was hesitant, a mix of surprise and unease. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to see through the shadows obscuring my face. I didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch between us, thick with tension. Instead, I raised my hand and gestured toward the table where the sleek black gift box rested, its crimson ribbon glowing like a warning under the warm lamplight. "Open it," I said, my voice low and steady. The man spoke first, his tone sharp and suspicious. "What's going on here? Who the hell are you?" "Open it," I repeated, ignoring him entirely as my eyes locked onto Sarah. My tone left no room for argument. Sarah's hands trembled as she stepped toward the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like gunshots in the heavy silence. She cast a nervous glance at the man, who gave her a slight nod, as if encouraging her to follow through. Slowly, she reached for the ribbon and untied it, the silken fabric slipping away with a soft hiss. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the lid. "Go on," I said coldly, watching her every move. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Her reaction was immediate. Her face went pale as her eyes fell on the shredded remnants of her wedding dress. She let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as she stumbled back a step. Her lover leaned over her shoulder, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he took in the contents. The envelope labeled, "To my beloved wife," and the USB drive resting atop the satin lining. "What the hell is this?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising in panic. She turned to me, her expression a mix of shock and anger. "What is this supposed to mean?" "This," I said, stepping closer and pulling back my hood to reveal my face, "is the end of your lies." The color drained completely from her face as the realization hit her. Her lips parted slightly, her breath hitching as she stared at me in disbelief. "Nick," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" I cut her off before she could continue, my tone cold and deliberate. "Save it, Sarah. I've been watching. Every message, every photo, every plan you made. And now you're going to face the truth." The man stepped forward, his bravado returning as he squared his shoulders. "Listen, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave. Now." I turned to him, my glare icy enough to silence him mid-sentence. "You don't get to speak. This is between me and her. You're just a sideshow." He hesitated, glancing at Sarah for direction. She didn't meet his gaze, her attention fixed on me as a mixture of fear and defiance began to creep into her expression. For the next few minutes, I laid everything bare. My voice was calm, but every word was laced with controlled fury. I recounted her lies in excruciating detail, the Tinder profile where she posed as a widow, her fabricated stories about her wealth and independence, her secret rendezvous in Portland. I told her how I had followed her, recorded her, documented every betrayal. You were so careful, weren't you? I said, my tone sharp with sarcasm. Careful enough to lie about being a widow. Careful enough to spin an entirely new life while I was at home raising our children. But not careful enough to stop me from finding out. Sarah's face flushed with anger, her fear morphing into indignation. How dare you spy on me like that? She shot back, her voice trembling with outrage. What gives you the right to invade my privacy? I let out a bitter laugh. Your privacy? Really, Sarah? You're standing here with him. I gestured toward the man, ready to betray me and our entire marriage, and you're talking about your privacy? Her eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms defensively. Maybe if you had paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to go looking elsewhere. Do you ever think about that, Nick? You're always so busy with work, with everything else. You left me alone in that house, day after day. The words stung, but I didn't let her see it. Don't you dare try to make this my fault, I said, my voice rising. I worked to give you everything you ever wanted, Sarah. A beautiful home, a family, security. And this is how you repay me? By lying to my face, to our kids, to everyone who ever trusted you. Her lover interjected again, stepping closer. You've made your point, man. She's obviously not happy with you. Maybe you should take a good look at yourself. I turned on him with venom. And maybe you should take a good look at what kind of man sleeps with another man's wife and calls it a win. You're not part of this conversation. Leave while you still can. Sarah's defiance began to crumble as the reality of the situation sank in. She sank into the nearest chair, her head in her hands. Nick, please, she said, her voice cracking. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but... No, I interrupted, my voice firm. This isn't something we fix. This is who you've become, Sarah. And I won't let you drag me or our kids down with you. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope containing the divorce papers, tossing it onto the table. This is the end of us. Sign those and stay out of my life. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Nick, don't do this. Please. I'm begging you. But I had already made up my mind. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her and her lover to deal with the wreckage of their choices. As I stepped into the rain-soaked night, I felt a strange sense of relief, as though a weight I'd carried for years had finally been lifted. This chapter of my life was over, and for the first time, I was free. Once home, I organized the evidence I had meticulously gathered over the weeks leading up to the confrontation. It was undeniable and irrefutable, a detailed account of Sarah's deception that would hold up in any courtroom. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I handed everything over to my attorney, Greg Hammond, who assured me that we had an airtight case for divorce. Back at home, the reality of the situation began to seep into every corner of our lives. The once warm atmosphere of our house felt cold and sterile. The kids, Emily and Josh, sensed something was wrong before I even told them. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, but the truth was impossible to hide. One evening, I gathered them in the living room. Emily, who was home from college for the weekend, sat on the couch, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Josh, always perceptive despite his quiet nature, sat beside her, his eyes flicking between me and Sarah. Why are we here? Emily asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. I took a deep breath, the weight of what I was about to say pressing heavily on my chest. There's something you need to know, I began, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Your mother and I are getting a divorce. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Emily's jaw dropped, and Josh's eyes widened in shock. What? Emily's voice was incredulous, her tone tinged with anger. Why? What happened? I hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who sat on the opposite end of the room, her expression a mixture of defiance and guilt. She had insisted on being present, claiming she wanted to tell her side of the story. It's complicated, I said carefully, not wanting to overwhelm them. But the truth is, Your mother has been unfaithful. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Josh's face contorted in confusion and disbelief. Is this true? He asked, his voice trembling as he turned to Sarah. Sarah's response was immediate and defensive. It's not that simple, she said, her voice rising. Your father hasn't been present. He's been obsessed with work, with his own life, and he left me feeling alone. I made mistakes, but this marriage was falling apart long before that. That's not true, I said firmly, refusing to let her rewrite the narrative. I worked hard for this family, for you and the kids. You chose to lie, to betray everything we built together. Emily stood abruptly, her face red with anger. You cheated? Mom, how could you? After everything Dad's done for us? I was unhappy. Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. Your father never saw me, never cared about my needs. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own home? Josh, always the quiet observer, finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You didn't think about us, did you? His words cut through the tension like a knife. You only thought about yourself. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in my personal life over the past few weeks. The sterile white walls, polished wood panels, and neatly aligned rows of benches seemed designed to exude order, but to me, they only amplified the tension simmering in the air. This was the day everything would be decided. This was Judgment Day. Sarah sat across the room at the opposing table, her posture rigid, her face carefully composed. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her hair neatly tied back, a picture of control and elegance. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked nervously toward the judge's bench and then to her attorney, a sharp-faced man in his 50s who looked as though he thrived on conflict. Beside me, my attorney, Greg Hammond, was the picture of calm confidence. His charcoal suit was impeccably pressed, his demeanor steady and unshakable. He leaned over and whispered, "Remember, Nick, stay composed. Let the evidence speak for itself." I nodded, my jaw clenched. Composure was easier said than done, but Greg was right. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I wouldn't let Sarah or her attorney derail the truth. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a sharp gaze, called the proceedings to order. Sarah's attorney began with his opening statement, weaving a tale of a neglected wife driven to loneliness by an absent husband. "Your Honor," he began, addressing the court with practiced gravitas, "my client, Sarah, has endured years of emotional neglect in her marriage. While Mr. Turner was consumed by his work, she was left to shoulder the responsibilities of maintaining their home and raising their children alone. It is not surprising, though deeply regrettable, that she sought comfort and validation elsewhere." He paused, casting a sympathetic glance toward Sarah. "This case is not simply about infidelity. It is about a marriage that was abandoned long before my client made her mistakes." I clenched my fists beneath the table, biting back the urge to respond. Greg placed a steadying hand on my arm, signaling for patience. When it was Greg's turn, he rose with an air of quiet authority. "Your Honor, opposing counsel's narrative is compelling, but it is not supported by the facts. This case is not about neglect. It is about choice. My client, Nick Turner, dedicated himself to providing a stable and loving environment for his family. The evidence we will present today demonstrates not only the depth of Mrs. Turner's betrayal, but also the deliberate and calculated nature of her actions." One by one, Greg presented the evidence we had meticulously gathered, laying it out like pieces of a puzzle that painted a damning picture. 1. The Tinder profile. Greg began by introducing screenshots of Sarah's Tinder profile. The court projector displayed the images on a large screen. The words, widowed, independent, adventurous, glaringly at odds with her actual life. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Greg pointed to the explicit nature of the messages she had exchanged. "Mrs. Turner described herself as a widow, Your Honor," Greg said, his tone even but pointed. Not only was this a blatant lie, but it also underscores her willingness to completely erase the existence of her family to pursue these activities. Sarah's attorney objected, claiming the profile was taken out of context. The judge overruled him, allowing Greg to continue. 2 photos and chats. Greg introduced a series of explicit photos and messages Sarah had sent to her Tinder matches, including Daniel Parker. Each message was time-stamped, aligning perfectly with times Sarah had claimed to be running errands or attending community events. Mrs. Turner was not seeking comfort or validation, Greg said firmly. She was engaging in a pattern of deceit, prioritizing her desires over the well-being of her family. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her carefully composed mask slipping for the first time. 3. Audio recordings. The most damning evidence came when Greg played snippets of the audio recordings from the Portland house. Sarah's voice filled the courtroom, discussing her fabricated backstory as a widow and expressing excitement about meeting multiple men. "This recording demonstrates premeditation, Your Honor," Greg stated. Mrs. Turner not only pursued extramarital relationships, but also actively maintained a false narrative to support her actions. The courtroom was silent as the recording played, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air. Even her attorney looked momentarily rattled. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she walked to the witness stand with her head held high. Her attorney guided her through a series of questions designed to evoke sympathy. "Mrs. Turner," he began, "can you describe how you felt in your marriage before these events?" Sarah took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "I felt invisible," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "Nick was always working. He rarely had time for me or the kids. I tried to talk to him, to make him see how lonely I was, but he didn't listen. I made mistakes, but I was desperate for someone to notice me." Her attorney nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Do you believe these mistakes would have happened if your husband had been more attentive?" "I don't think so," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt him, but I felt like I didn't matter anymore." Greg stood, his expression calm but unyielding. "Mrs. Turner," he began, "you claim you felt invisible in your marriage. Yet, the evidence shows that you spent significant time and resources pursuing extramarital relationships. Can you explain how this aligns with your claims of loneliness?" Sarah hesitated, her confidence wavering. I was looking for connection," she said finally. "Something I wasn't getting at home." "Were you also seeking connection when you created a Tinder profile claiming to be a widow?" Greg pressed. "When you described yourself as wealthy and independent, knowing full well those statements were untrue?" Sarah's face flushed. I was just trying to escape for a while." "Escape," Greg repeated, his tone sharp, "at the expense of your husband and children. Mrs. Turner, do you believe your actions were justified?" "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge finally delivered her verdict. Her voice was steady, her tone firm. "This court finds the evidence overwhelmingly supports Mr. Turner's claims. Mrs. Turner's actions demonstrate a clear and sustained pattern of deceit that has irreparably harmed her family. Custody of the children will be awarded to Mr. Turner, along with the marital home and joint assets. Mrs. Turner will retain only her personal belongings and a modest settlement." Sarah's face crumpled, her composure shattering as the weight of the ruling sank in. Her attorney leaned over, whispering something, but she shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I felt a surge of relief mixed with sadness. This wasn't a victory. It was the end of a chapter one had once believed would last a lifetime. But it was the justice I needed to move forward. As the courtroom emptied, I caught a glimpse of Sarah sitting alone at the defendant's table, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. There was no anger, no defiance, only a quiet resignation. I turned and walked out, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. This chapter was over. It was time to begin anew. A year had passed, and the rain-soaked streets of Seattle were now a distant memory. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in San Francisco, California, watching the morning sunrise over the Golden Gate Bridge. The salty breeze carried with it the faint sound of seagulls, a reminder that this was a fresh start, a new chapter one had fought hard to create. The move had been a decision born out of necessity. After everything that had happened, staying in Seattle felt like clinging to a life that no longer existed. My career had offered me the perfect out, a promotion that came with an opportunity to relocate. San Francisco, with its vibrant energy and constant reinvention, seemed like the ideal place to rebuild not just my life, but my family's as well. Emily and Josh had adjusted to the move better than I had hoped. Emily, now 21, had transferred to Stanford University, where she was thriving in her environmental science program. Her confidence had returned, though it had taken months for her to forgive her mother. Josh, at 17, was finishing his senior year of high school, his passion for art flourishing in the creative atmosphere of the Bay Area. His latest sketches adorned the walls of our apartment, a testament to his resilience. One evening, as we sat together for dinner, Emily looked up from her plate and said, "You know, Dad, I wasn't sure about this move at first, but I think it was the right choice." I smiled, a warmth spreading through me. "I'm glad you feel that way. I just want us to have a fresh start." Josh nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It feels different here. Better, I guess. Like we can just breathe." Their words reaffirmed what I had been striving for all along, a chance for us to heal and grow stronger together. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had taken a much different turn. After the divorce, she had moved into a small apartment in a less affluent part of Seattle. Her lover had disappeared shortly after the court's ruling, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. Friends who had once admired her distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one exposed in the courtroom. Emily and Josh had limited contact with her, a decision they made on their own. "She needs to figure out her life," Emily had said once, her tone resolute. "We can't do that for her." Occasionally, Sarah would call or text, her messages a mix of apologies and attempts to rekindle their connection. Josh rarely responded, and when he did, it was brief and polite. Emily was less forgiving, often ignoring her entirely. Their choice wasn't born of hatred, but of self-preservation. They were learning to set boundaries, and I couldn't fault them for that. Professionally, the move to San Francisco had been a boon. My role as a senior executive at a tech firm was demanding but rewarding. The challenges of the job gave me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my energy into something constructive. But more than that, it gave me the flexibility to prioritize my family. Late nights at the office were a thing of the past. I made sure to be present, at Emily's academic presentations, at Josh's art exhibitions, at every milestone, big or small. I also took the time to rediscover myself. For years, my identity had been tied to being a husband and a provider, roles that had been stripped away in the most painful way. Now, I was learning to embrace who I was outside of those labels. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. I joined a local book club, met new people, and even started taking cooking classes, a nod to Emily's teasing about my limited culinary skills. One evening, as I sat on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of Sarah's betrayal had been a defining moment, but it hadn't defined me. Instead, it had taught me lessons I hadn't realized I needed. I had learned the importance of trust, not just in others, but in myself. I had learned that resilience wasn't about ignoring pain, but about facing it head-on and finding a way to move forward. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's choices. Sarah's actions had been a reflection of her, not me. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the papers on the small patio table. I set down my glass and leaned against the railing, staring out at the glittering city lights. "You're stronger than you think," I said softly to myself, a mantra I had come to believe. As the months turned into a year, life began to feel less like a struggle and more like an adventure. I made a vow to myself that I would never let betrayal define my future. Instead, I would focus on the things that truly mattered: my children, my integrity, and the life I was building anew. The scars from the past would always be there, but they no longer felt like a burden. They were a part of my story, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The chapter of pain and betrayal was finally closed. This was a new beginning. What would you have done in Nick's situation? Confront the betrayal head-on as he did, or handle it differently? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling for more gripping real-life tales. Catch you in the next video.